And ladies and gentlemen, it may be the dead time of the NBA offseason, but me and Jacob Moreno are not going anywhere. We're here to break down a little more Sixers action and talking all things offseason. So excited to hang with you guys tonight. Appreciate each one of you guys getting involved in the conversation, hanging with us, dropping comments below. And we got some stuff to talk about in the Sixers world still. There is a lot of NBA news, a lot of NBA conversation, and very little of it pertaining to the Philadelphia 76ers. I want to dive into why I think there's a bit more disrespect being said to this franchise. Not that they've earned much respect in recent years, to be fair, but why that is the case and if there should be a chip on the shoulder on the Sixers team. So before we dive fully into things, Jacob Moreno, how we doing today, my guy?
Doing well. How about you?
Doing great. I'm fired up. I'm feeling good right now. So life is good. Things are popping. Not enough in the Sixers world, but that is why I wanted to talk with you today. So the first thing that I did want to dive into is we did get this player rankings coming out on NBA Central, posting up the graphics for it here, and Joel Embiid coming in at sixth place in this. Now, obviously, there is an asterisk next to this. We saw him for 31 games last year, and it is tough to grade on a scale, especially when we're getting quotes coming out like this coming from Keith Pompey here saying that the end may be near for Joel Embiid. But I did want to get your initial thoughts on this. Is this something you think Joel Embiid should take as disrespect? Do you get it from the voters' standpoint? And what else pops to mind when you saw that?
I mean, I think, what do you say, 31 or 19 games, regardless. He's barely played the season. So honestly, I don't even think it's fair to rank him.
Fair.
I don't think it's fair to himself as a player or just the criteria of the list overall. But if that list is trying to go for who's going to be the best in the East for the next season, honestly, with how many games he'll likely inevitably miss, I think six is probably a good spot considering couldn't see the full list, but when you got guys like Cade Cunningham, Donovan Mitchell, and obviously Giannis and them, yeah, I think it's honestly a solid placement just considering Joel Embiid with the injuries, unfortunately, probably won't be that MVP, elite, best in the world level player that we've grown accustomed to.
Yeah, there is no perfect way to grade this, and obviously Joel Embiid is not going to be up at night being ranked sixth in the Eastern Conference, and he's probably like the biggest example of everyone's going to define him a little differently. If you are an availability guy, if you think Mikal Bridges is the best player in the NBA because he'll play all 82, or Buddy Hield, the best player in the NBA, Paul Reed, best player in the NBA because they're there for all 82, then I hear you. I've been sort of against that take for quite some time, that I will take a guy like Joel Embiid that is going to be one of the clear-cut best player in the world for as many games as he is there, as long as that guy is still in there. And I think there's been some, I don't want to say concerning takeaways, but I'm feeling less confident than ever that guy still may in here. Now, I still think six is too low. I think the worst version of Joel Embiid is still comfortably better than 90% of the NBA. But what do you think are fair expectations for him going into this season?
Man, we have no clue with this.
Yeah.
like I think we've talked about it before. I think we're going to see an all-star caliber center for sure on his best nights, like a guy who could, I think he could still pop off for like 35, depending on the matchup. But
Yeah.
I think we see a guy who averages maybe closer to like 26-ish points per game with his usual offensive impact. I think hopefully if the guys are more available this year, he can kind of lean into playmaking some more. I feel like we've been saying that for the last however many years at this point. But even then, if you're getting an all-star caliber center who averages 26 points per game with an all-around impact, that's still a very, very, very good basketball player.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I said, I think his days of being that MVP front runner going band for band with Jokic are over. But still, I think we're going to see an effective version of Joel Embiid in however many games he'll play.
Yeah, I do mostly agree with that. And the biggest concern that I have, or like what I'll be watching out for the most, is on the defensive side of the ball, that they simply need
Yeah.
him to be capable of being an anchor of a defense in a way that he just straight up wasn't in when he was on the floor last year, which once again was a bit rare, but we will see how that plays out. Shout out to Robert getting involved in the conversation in the comments saying, meh, the disrespect is well earned. Embiid will not be healthy ever again, and we have him on a 4-year supermax. The front office signed him knowing the issue, and that is fair criticism. I do think sometimes it comes on a bit thick for Daryl Morey with that in particular. Unfortunately, the way the NBA works is stars get paid. That you're not going to nickel and dime your star, particularly when they are extension eligible. Embiid is a unique case, and I think it is fair to criticize that he should have been viewed in that light from Daryl Morey directly. But nonetheless, this is the bed that they chose to sleep in, and that is how things will go down. Now, the disrespect does not apply to just Joel Embiid here, as there is also a ranking that we got here with the Sixers at 18, according to ESPN in the NBA. And this is when I begin to be like, like, come on, man. Even the worst version of this Sixers team, I think, is better than that. That I think if we're talking about the hypothetical in which there is no Joel Embiid or Paul George for a significant extended period of times, I still think they're going to be comfortably better than a number of these teams. I think people are underrating who Tyrese Maxey is, who Jared McCain is, who VJ Edgecombe could be, and I do think that we're due for some sort of return from Paul George. He may never be the max contract guy, but I refuse to believe he is the shell of himself that he looked like last year. Where are you at on all that, Jacob?
I think I'd have to do my own list before I'd say they're a top whatever, but I think 18 is a bit of a stretch because
Yeah.
8+8, that's both playoff teams in both conferences. So ESPN is projecting him in like a low tier lottery, or not lottery, I'm sorry, low tier play-in team. And
Yeah.
I think that is a bit unfair. But it is interesting because like I even said on a TikTok yesterday, the Sixers have the weirdest ceiling in the NBA. Like this could be a team who could be as high as a 2 or 3 seed, winning like 54 plus games, or it could also be as low as like an 11 seed. And it all depends on Joel Embiid and Paul George and their availability. But I do think in the lens of who they could potentially be, I think they are definitely, I want to say they'll avoid the plan. I think they will if Paul George and Joel Embiid play a decent amount of games. I don't think it's going to be like last year where players are going to be in and out of the lineup because like obviously with the injuries, I can't say for sure, but like the bad luck they had in all this situation, it was just chaotic. I don't think we'll see that again next season. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. I think this is a team who has potential to be within like at a top 7 team in the NBA, but also could be an 18th best team in the NBA. So I can't really say if it's like full disrespect. Like I understand why people could be low on them, but also I feel like at the same time it's maybe a little bit too low.
Yeah, and it is just interesting to me, like, whenever you see some of the national pundits speaking about the NBA rankings or teams and how open the Eastern Conference is, which it absolutely is there, it's so funny to hear them just sort of go down the list of the Boston Celtics lost Jason Tatum, that the Indiana Pacers.
I don't see that vision.
Yeah.
I don't see the Celtics or Pacers. And
Yeah.
that's not even me being biased at all.
No, I hear you. My point being here is it's just kind of they feel like they get to the Sixers and then just skip over them. And nobody has any idea, which is very, very interesting to me. I do think the Eastern Conference is wide open. And to put this to the side like a little bit, I understand that we've lived for almost a decade now where it is expectations that this team is contending year in and year out, that they are considered one of the Eastern Conference threats. It is going to be a bit refreshing to me to just see this is going to be a bunch of guys that go hard every single night, a bunch of young players who are hungry, who are going to scrap, headlined by VJ Edgecombe, Jared McCain, and Tyrese Maxey. And I did want to pull up how they are already in the gym working out, and that's sort of refreshing to me. Seeing Tyrese Maxey take on a bit of a leadership role, it feels, as it's cool to see him in the gym with these young guys, which is sort of a rarity. I think that is kind of awesome, and I'm sort of looking forward to, I don't want to say expectationless basketball, but it's something that's going to be a change up from a mentality standpoint.
No, absolutely. And you look, I was even watching that video and I was expecting it to be like BJ Jabari and like Adem Bona, but like to see Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain there, I think Justin Edwards was even there too. Like it's really telling because I think like Harrison Grimm said earlier today, like, you know, you look at this team the past few years and culture and chemistry has always been sort of a question mark. So to see all this camaraderie and you even look at Jared McCain and VJ Edgecombe doing live streams together, like the vibes are there. And it almost kind of reminds me of like that innocence basketball era, like in the 2017-18 season where Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Dario Saric, Markelle Fultz, even though he wasn't playing, he was still like the vibes were there. And I feel like I'm kind of getting that same type of thing here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And better players as far as the young talent.
Yeah.
This is not the process era where we're talking ourselves into Hollis Thompson and Tony Roten and Henry Sims or whoever you want to throw out there. These are blue chip prospects. These are guys that have been on high level basketball radars for the entirety of their life, from Tyrese Maxey to Jared McCain and VJ Edgecombe. A bit of a different lens as he sort of burst onto the scene a bit later, coming from the Bahamas. But the dude has the pedigree, and I also love the clip floating around that pops on my timeline seemingly every couple days of him and Justin Edwards going toe to toe in high school. That's awesome stuff right there, and I think it is cool how all these are sort of intertwined, and that we're seeing these relationships begin to grow. That the keys of the franchise have very quietly and sort of more notably of late, I would say, been handed, that we are not living and dying with just Paul George and Joel Embiid's injury uncertainty. There is this bright future for what the next era is, which is really encouraging to me. And VJ in particular is a guy who's, I guess, personality, I would say, has shined out to me. We're seeing him on the podcast P show that he did watch or write out the Players Tribune article. Any takeaways from what you're seeing from VJ Edgecombe as far as his initial impressions that he's making on Philadelphia and just who he is as a person and basketball player?
I think he's saying and doing all the right things from the moment he got drafted to his appearance on Podcast P. And what stood out to me on that appearance with Paul George is the players he studied defensively. He said Drew Holiday, Derek White, and someone else I'm forgetting. And offensively, he said Dwayne Wade, Victor Oladipo during his Pacers tenure, and Anthony Edwards. And I think those are the exact right comparisons when we talk about guards who are great downhill scorers, but also guards who can develop counters like throughout the mid range and beyond the arc. And defensively, I mean, for point of attack defenders like Derek White, Lou Dort, and Drew Holiday, those are some of the best you can get. So VJ knowing what he wants to be already is a big thing. And when you talk about doing the little things, like VJ on that appearance of Paul George, he knew he was in a unique situation where he can't be like the guy right away. He knew he has to fit in, but also find that mix of asserting himself. And I feel like doing all these little things and playing alongside so much talent, being part of what hopefully should be a winning basketball team, will only help him when he ascends to stardom, 3 or 4 years from now.
And we will eventually have to abandon the Ace Bailey comparisons here. But I will say, what a refreshing difference from a mindset perspective in everything that is being said. And the other thing that really stood out to me is it feels like so many of these young prospects are like so media trained and so savvy and like having things prepared, making sure they're not talking off color or saying something that might resonate wrong. VJ to me just feels like he's just him. Like he's just speaking from his mind, has a good personality, and like
said he hates college basketball.
Yeah, said he hates college basketball. And I do think that is a very fair point that he brought up about spacing, playing with a double big lineup at Baylor where people can sit in the paint. I don't think we've seen the best version of him as a basketball player yet, and I think the Bahamas tape certainly backs that up, that when there is more spacing, there is more movement, there's more ability to attack the cup, as he put it himself in that podcast there. So anything else that stood out from you in that? I love your point about who he models and the kind of the role, because I do think that is a huge deal. But did anything else jump out to you?
Just his character and just the way he kind of presents himself. Like the Sixers, maybe since Jimmy, I know we all have the Jimmy Butler comparisons. I'm not even trying to do that as like an encore product, but like I'm just thinking about mentality wise, the intensity Jimmy brings. I feel like the Sixers haven't had a player like that since him, and it looks like VJ Edgecombe could potentially bring that chippiness and intensity back into the locker room, which is just so great for the culture because the Sixers haven't had enough of those guys. You look back at that 2022 playoff series against the Heat, and Joel Embiid even said they lacked toughness and they needed a guy like PJ Tucker, and that's a whole nother story. But the point being is like there has not been enough fire in that locker room, and VJ is going to be a very welcome addition.
Yeah, and especially important, like I've sort of fought my battles about, I don't believe the best player always has to be the leader. In an ideal world, that's certainly the case, but I think you can find examples in both directions here where there are guys that are just the best player, that they show up, they're going to ball, but you have to combat that with locker room leadership. And I think there's been efforts like PJ Tucker, who you brought up, an example of that is that's a guy who's getting in Embiid's ear and trying to fire up the troops and being that, but you kind of have to have this widespread culture. And I do think the Sixers have leaned into that more and are starting to establish that foundation in a way that was overlooked. Largely, I would point to it because of all the front office turnover and just internal turnover within the organization. There has not been stability around Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid has not provided that stability on his end as well. And I don't believe we fully dove into like that Embiid article. I don't think we did on the last pod, did we?
No, we have not.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've spoken since then. So I do think that was kind of cool to hear his perspective on things. There's a lot of stuff in there that I think we either have heard whispers of or everyone kind of theorized, but to hear it from the horse's mouth and for Embiid to just lay it out there, I thought was awesome there. So do you have any immediate thoughts you want to dive into on that Embiid article?
I think for me personally, I've always tried to never criticize what a player is going through personally or what they may do or may not do. Like especially in Joel Embiid's case, I've never been one to call him lazy or soft. And I think when you read the article, like you'll see he is far from those things.
Yeah.
And was it a little bit fluffy here and there? Sure. And we were even talking about this before we went on, but like we've never heard Joel Embiid's side of this, and it was just so refreshing to see it. Like we've never seen him be this vulnerable because throughout press conferences, he's been like stoic for the past like 5 years at this point. So it was just great to see his perspective on literally everything, what he went through mentally, trying to prep himself for the Knicks series. That part was just jaw dropping. And just such a refreshing, like insightful take. And considering outlets like ESPN are so hot take culture
Yeah.
nowadays, it's really refreshing to like that classic sports journalism.
Yeah, some of the best journalism that I've honestly ever read. Like, I thought it was
Yeah.
incredible to get that level of access to Joel Embiid, who is one of the more guarded athletes that I've ever seen there, is really impressive here. And shout out to Dotun, the author there, who, like, getting that level of trust is really impressive. And he did do an interview on Rights Ricky Sanchez podcast, which was really interesting as they asked him that question, which was the number one thing that, like, jumped to mind when reading it is, how did you get this level of access to Joel Embiid? Why did he trust you? And it was interesting that his answer is like, truthfully, I don't know if I'll ever really know the answer to that. That it felt like for a lot of the process, I was getting the normal Joel Embiid closed off answers. Then all of a sudden, things did change. And I do feel like that had more to do internally with Joel directly than anything that Dotun did in kind of the process of reporting there. So I bring that question to the table here, Jacob, is why do you think Joel Embiid felt motivated or the need to sort of get his side of the story, if you want to put it that way, or I guess fill in the gaps of things we don't know about it? Why is now the time for him to get this all off his chest?
Just want to start by saying, obviously, like, we had no idea what's going on in Joel Embiid's head, but I feel like ever since that game he was supposed to play against the Nuggets in the 2024 season, where he was suddenly ruled out, like, what, 30 minutes before tip-off?
Yeah.
Like, the hate, social media was crazy. And I was even thinking about this the other day. Then he forced himself to play against Golden State. It was almost like an eerie feeling. Like, we knew he was supposed to be on the floor. Then
And to jump
Jonathan
in here,
Kuminga.
like everyone talks about the Jonathan Kuminga moment. Anyone that watched that game, he was not moving like himself before that.
Yeah, and my point was just like the Kuminga thing colliding with his knee was like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And I feel like ever since that, Joel Embiid mentally has been in a downward spiral, and he even alluded to that in the article. Like, he was playing the best basketball of his life up to this point. Like,
some of the best I've ever seen, anyone has ever seen. Yeah.
Like, exactly. I was going to say, like, even during the season, I was thinking, like, this might be one of the best center peaks in NBA history if he can stay healthy. Fortunately, he didn't. We saw he went through hell just to play minutes during the Knicks series. I feel like that game against the Warriors, the Olympics, all the crazy stuff that happened this season. I feel like Joel Embiid, with all those moments culminating, just really wanted to take this chance to actually tell it how he thought, how it happened, and like how it is from his angle. I think that's basically what he wanted to do, just considering there's been so much talk about him, the state of the franchise, if they're contenders. I feel like he just wanted to lay out all on the table. And if that's true, I respect him for that for sure.
Yeah, no, 100% there. And for me personally, we don't got to dive too deep in the personal stuff here, but I will say Joel Embiid is an athlete that means something to me in a way that like no athlete ever kind of compares to. That my sort of Sixers root here was during the process days, that I watched every single one of those games when they were one of the worst teams historically here, that I tore my ACL that year and I was just kind of holed up watching, stuck on the couch. And then all of a sudden they drafted this man named Joel Hans Embiid. And that's when I started to believe in the process as a whole, buying into the Sam Hinkie vision, and to just see like the flashes of what we got when we would see just the grainy gym footage of him working out there and him trolling on social media. And then all of a sudden the debut against the Thunder where you see, wow, we might have got one. We might have got a star. And then for him to develop into beyond what even the best case scenario of what anyone could have hoped for. I do hope that there is still a little more basketball life within him, but we will see what ultimately plays itself out. Shout out to Joel for being as open about that, and I think everyone should appreciate just the perspective of him giving it, that a guy that has been as guarded as he has been to put it out on the table like that. So an awesome article, a win for journalism, I would say, to sort of get that real reporting as you mentioned there, and shout out to Joel Embiid for putting it all on the table there. Now, to transition from here and bring it back to the Sixers team, we mentioned a lot about the young core. There is so much concern over how do all these pieces fit together. So much so that I read this list on Bleacher Report ranking Jared McCain as the number one trade asset in the NBA right now. I would have prefaced this by saying I'm in no rush to figure out what are the pieces that can play together. I think you figure that out in the long term. But do you have any takes on that of as far as like, what is the future building, or do you have any concerns that there are too many guards at the current time?
My thing is like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
They haven't even played a game together yet. They haven't even had training camp. And this kind of even ties in with the crowd saying trade Maxey while his value is high.
Crazy.
Like, what are we doing? We haven't even seen, and Quinton Grimes will eventually resign. We haven't even seen these four on the floor together yet. We haven't seen what the lineups will look like, who the starting five is it going to be. And I just think it's way too early to do that. And like we said, I think we've even said this on this show, right? It's a great thing in the modern NBA to have guard depth and to have lineup versatility. But one of the issues with that, especially when you look at the team in terms of being a depth, like in terms of front court depth, is there's not really anybody there aside from a Dembona who can kind of be that fail-safe rim protector because
Yeah.
when you have too many guards on the floor at the same time, if you run a three-guard lineup, you're going to be short out there, and you need a guy to kind of protect the rim. And the Sixers really don't have enough of that because, like you said, defensively, we have no idea what we're going to get from Joel Embiid. And that's the one thing that kind of worries me. But we have so much young talent, and it's just not fair to want to already throw them in a trade already when they haven't even started trading yet. That's my take at least.
Yeah, totally agree there. And I will also throw in that Clippers pick that they got in the James Harden trade, also on that top 10 list of trade assets around the NBA. So another just point in favor of a bright future for Philadelphia there. But yeah, that should be the takeaway here is it's a good problem to have if you have too many young, talented guards. And there is no rush in figuring out which of these pieces are the long-term foundations. It's the likely outcome that not all these pieces fit together, and they will eventually have to find a way to trade and move or figure out what the missing pieces are. But that is a problem for down the road, not remotely to consider this year. Now, you mentioned Quinton Grimes there. Obviously, no real traction or reports or any sort of rumblings on what that number could look like. We know the situation as far as there is no market for restricted free agents. And we're seeing the same thing with Jonathan Kuminga and the Warriors, which should be viewed in a little bit of a different light as there's more bad blood there. Josh Giddey and the Bulls, I think, is probably a little bit cleaner example, but obviously Giddey spent a whole season there versus Grimes being a midseason acquisition. And then Cam Thomas, who there's certainly more bad blood there between Cam Thomas and the Nets than Quinton Grimes and the Sixers.
And Zach Lowe.
Yeah, and Zach Lowe, certainly putting that on the table. And I will just note here, for a guy that one of probably the criticisms of is immaturity there, maybe tweeting at one of the more well-respected NBA minds, probably not the best route that I would take there, but nonetheless, we'll see how that
I want to add, I listened to that podcast with him and Nekias Duncan, and they did like a whole 15-minute deep dive on this game.
Completely
talked
fair.
About his improved playmaking.
Yeah.
And talked about all the things that he did good and bad, and it was crazy the way Cam reacted.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think Cam probably just saw that one quote, the aggregation that popped around about the empty calorie scoring there. But I agree. When you listen to the whole segment, I thought Zach honestly did a really good job and a really fair job breaking everything down. But to shift it back to Quinton Grimes, what's your sense on things to this point? Has there just been no movement across the board? Is this going to continue to drag itself out? Do you have any prediction for what that dollar figure will look like? And I guess my bigger question would be timeline-wise, when does this eventually get decided on?
I think my guess would probably be mid-August because, like we've talked about, it's just an interesting situation because you kind of have to understand both sides.
Yeah.
The Sixers, they don't want to needlessly overpay when they don't have to. Like right now, theoretically, they could offer him like the MLE amount and just say, "Here, take it," and find some money elsewhere. But Quinton Grimes also, his camp wants to try to find the most money, so they're going to wait it out, see if a trade happens, and if a trade happens, if some team like gets some extra cap space that they could offer him. But right now, I believe like only the Jazz could clear like $17 million off their books to offer him anything, and I don't even think anything's been reported about Utah even being interested. So
and why would they?
I feel like they're just at
yeah.
And I feel like we're just at a stalemate. So I feel like maybe when the first restricted free agent signs, whether that's Kuminga, Giddey, or Cam Thomas, I feel like maybe that dollar figure will kind of set the precedent, and then we'll kind of see everything else follow. But I don't know. I feel like it's just going to be a matter where we're going to have to wait a few more weeks.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case there. The Sixers know they're negotiating against no one, as even the Utah Jazz that you pointed out there. Like, what do they really have to gain by putting in a qualifying or putting in a restricted offer sheet for Quinton Grimes? Yeah, like the only motivation to do that, which they've done this before with Paul Reed, would more or less be to mess with the Sixers and drive up the price range. There is not really a desire, or it doesn't make sense, at least in my mind, for Utah to try and add Quinton Grimes. When you think about the context of this is a team that actively wants to be bad and in the running for a number one pick last year, that is the clear goals that they've laid out, and they've got plenty of young talent that, frankly, Quinton Grimes would be eating into the minutes of the Isaiah Colliers, the Walter Clayton Jr.'s, the Ace Baileys that are already on that roster there. So certainly, in theory, and Grimes camp will continue to bark up this tree here, is that is a team that could make an offer, but I don't see a world in which this comes down to anyone outside the Philadelphia 76ers.
They have no leverage
at
all.
Exactly.
Like right now, they just don't.
And the last thing that
And
I wanted to bring up
yeah,
here was the qualifying offer. So in theory, Quinton Grimes could take the move of I'm betting on myself. I'm taking the 1 year. I think 8.7 million is the number or right around there. And then
yeah.
he will be an unrestricted free agent next year and can max out. That there are not the restrictions, the current restricted free agent market, that he could get whatever offer he wants to take without the Sixers having a right to match. And obviously there should be more money theoretically in the cap space across the league next year. Do you think there's any chance that Grimes goes down that path?
And I don't think so because historically this hasn't worked out well. I hope Grimes' camp will be smarter than that, considering the fact that the Sixers have so many talented guards. Like, if VJ Edgecombe is what a lot of people think he is, then Quentin Grimes is going to cost himself millions of dollars
Yeah.
because VJ Edgecombe is a very similar player. And if he ascends at that type of level, then the Sixers, they're not going to want to pay Grimes north of 15 million a year. So I think his best bet is to take an offer in like the 16, 18 million range. I think that's a fair range. I think if the Sixers can get him for around 16 million, that would be more ideal for them. I think it'd be very good value because not only is it a good value for a guy with promising 3-and-D upside, but roughly right now the Sixers are 11 million below the first tax apron. So if you plug that 60 million in, leaves about 5 million into the first apron, then maybe you can try to salary dump Drummond and be back, below that first apron just barely. So I think, that'd probably be good value, but no, taking the qualifying offer with such a stacked backcourt probably isn't the best move.
And I'll also note that for these conversations about how do the pieces all fit together is one of the solutions that you have to have tradable contracts here. And that would be a very tradable contract. I do think Quentin Grimes would be a mistake if he went down the qualifying offer. And the reason that I say that, this is already his 4th NBA team. And while he's shown some flashes, particularly the New York Knicks, I would say outside of that stretch with the Sixers were probably his best minutes as an NBA player there. But for a guy that has not had much stability in his career, I think it makes sense to ink a long-term deal and sort of solidify your place in the league in a way that I think you would be playing a dangerous game. Because to your point about VJ Edgecombe, what happens if you take this qualifying offer and then all of a sudden we're talking about Quentin Grimes in like a 20-minute per game type of role? There is a world where that is how it plays itself out. I don't think that is how things will go, but we will see ultimately when guys take the floor here. Now I'm going to throw a little bit of a tough one at you. So we'll extend it to Quentin Grimes here. So the 4 primary young guards that we're speaking out, that being Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, VJ Edgecombe, and Quentin Grimes. If I asked you to rank them right now, making the bet of when these guys reach their athletic and NBA prime, playing the best basketball of their career, who will have the highest peak out of those 4?
VJ for sure.
VJ, really? Okay, sell me on it. You think the athleticism, the defense, all that translates in a way that these other guys do not quite have?
Wait, actually, I'm going to retract that.
Okay.
Actually, I'll go Jeremy McCain first.
Okay.
The more I think about it.
Okay.
I think the offensive upside, for as limited as he may be defensively, shot creation, we saw it during his rookie season. We saw the playmaking chops, obviously the 3-point shooting. When you put that all together, like you're getting an offensive force. I think that upside on the offensive end kind of outweighs everything else. I think Tyrese Maxey, I don't think he's hit his prime yet.
Agreed.
I do think he has a ways to go as a playmaker, even though I think that was a little bit overhated this season. But I think when you just look at everything that Jared McCain does, the way he can kind of decelerate, dictate the pace for himself, but also the offensive I just think it's a very underrated trait that not a lot of young guards have, especially at that stage in their career. So I'd go Jared McCain first. Dang.
This is tough.
VJ and Maxey is a tough one.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go. I think Maxey is a safer bet.
Okay.
VJ third, but I do want to say if VJ really figures out the on-ball creation, there is a world, and that's why I said him first at the beginning. I'm saying if he figures out shot creation with the athleticism, there was a world where he is better than all 4 of these guards. Then I'd go Quinton Grimes for it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. You ended up with the same list that I was there. I would go McCain 1, Maxey 2, VJ 3, and I do think Grimes the pretty clear 4 out of the 4 of those there. But you're absolutely right that if things fully click with VJ Edgecombe, if he reaches the 100% best version of what he could be, I do think that is probably the number 1 on this list. Now, I am not as confident in making that bet as we obviously have an NBA sample size for these other guys here. I'm a big believer in what we saw from Jared McCain, and I know it was 23 games, but that felt real to me. The off-ball movement, the instincts, the quick release, the repeatable shot form. This is all stuff that screams a game-changing talent to me, a guy that will make his impact felt and could be raking up quite a few all-stars in this league if things are break right. And I do think that he's just built for it in a way that I completely respect. Like, even it's something as simple as him not being afraid to do the whole nail polish game and him going to Duke in the process of putting the target on his bat. I love everything about that from Jared McCain's angle, so that would be my bet as well. I think if I'm ranking the peak of what these guys will be, I think there's a non-zero chance that we were talking about Jared McCain as like a legitimate Steph Curry disciple.
I don't know if I'm ready to call him the next Steph, but I do think he'll be a very, very high level star guard. Like definitely a player in that top 9 to 12 range at his prime.
Yeah, no, I see it absolutely there. And I do think I'll also add here for the Tyrese Maxey fit and size conversations, it looks like that man has grown a couple inches. And I think we should keep that in mind with each of these. Like,
he even said so.
Yeah, he even said so. I quote tweeted shout out Legs on Twitter about that, saying he put on. So if these guys can grow together literally and physically here, we are maybe having a little bit of a different discussion. I will also bring up with Maxey, I'm going to continue to lead this charge of we can no longer talk about this guy as a bad defender. That I think he took the strides last year and it got lost in the shuffle and madness of what was last season. But I think this dude at worst is going to be like a league average defender moving forward. And I honestly think he's probably a notch above that. Do you think that is fair or am I overdoing it?
I wouldn't say a notch. I'd say league average most nights.
Okay.
Depending on the matchup. Like if he's going to Cade, I would not like that matchup. Like,
I don't know.
I think that's the next step for him because like when you're dealing with like muscular big guards like Cade, I don't think Maxey would do well against that, especially with got a guy like Jalen Duren screening for him. Like screen navigation hasn't been there. But I will say to your point, he's done much better guarding off the point of attack.
Yeah.
On-ball instincts are there. He's done a nice job forcing turnovers. I don't have the stats with that. I'd assume he probably had a career best in steals per game. But yeah, like definitely take strides. Not, neutral defender on most nights, not ready to say plus yet.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Maybe I'm coming on a little bit strong with it, but I was really encouraged with the strides that he took last year. And the game that really sticks in my brain was pretty early in the season against the Celtics, where he was just straight up dominating Jaylen Brown defensively, forcing steals, getting in his way, providing resistance and attacking the basket in a way that I was like, I did not realize Tyrese Maxey had this in the tank. Now, we will see how this translates on a season that hopefully has a little bit larger aspirations than was the case last year and translates to winning in a different way. This will be a clearer judge of what he will be, but I'm really encouraged. Now, I did want to make that point clear that I do believe like the worst case scenario is this guy can be the worst defender on a very good defense. And I honestly think that we could talk ourselves into a bit above that, but we will let the dust fully settle with that. Now, VJ Edgecombe's a guy that I think the more that I has digested, that has to be Nick Nurse absolutely salivating at getting him involved in his system there. And one of the critiques that I would have for Nick Nurse directly here is when you think about like the best version of him as a head coach is certainly during his early days at the Raptors when you had all these switchable athletic wings that could wreak havoc on the defensive end and generate turnovers. I do think it's fair to criticize that he has not adapted his system to what his personnel has been in Philadelphia, but it does feel like we're inching closer to having some guys like VJ Edgecombe directly that can fill that role. So how do you see VJ slotting into that? And do you think that the Nurse's system maybe plays out a little bit more as designed this year?
First, I do want to combat that Nurse point a little bit,
Okay.
at least on the defensive end. Offensively, I think he's left a lot to be desired, but defensively, it's kind of hard to employ that system when your center was getting torched in drop coverage all season.
Fair.
And VJ and however many strong perimeter defenders they have, at the end of the day, you have to have a strong presence at the rim, and the Sixers just didn't have that. But with that being said, I do think VJ will be a great defender. I don't know if he'll be shut down in the first year, but like he does have some things to work on. I think he does gamble a little bit, like especially when playing off the ball. But like you said, you know, the motor, the athleticism, the weak side shot blocking, everything, like he's going to cause some havoc, and he is a perfect fit for Nick Nurse defensively as someone who can just kind of aggressively navigate screens, force turnovers, and then create easy transition opportunities, because that's exactly what Nick Nurse wants to do. Just the issue is the Sixers really don't have that front court defensive infrastructure to do it.
Yeah, that is a fair pushback there. And obviously, I'll also will be fair to Nick Nurse from the defensive side stamps of when you have a rotating cast of characters that you don't even know who's going to be in the lineup on a night-to-night basis, makes it a little bit more difficult to implement those styles of
and they don't have a power forward, a real one.
Yeah, yes. Now, to that
like, that's what I'm saying. There's so – oh, I'm sorry. Let me cut you off. But, like, I was gonna say there's so much lack. Like Joel Embiid, not very meh drop coverage defender at this point, and that's putting it lightly. And the Sixers have no real size at the forward position. So when you're overly tasking your guards on the defensive end, it's just not gonna end well,
Yeah.
especially with that lack of front court size. But what were you gonna say?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. To your point about the power forward position, so obviously Gershon Yabusele out there and out to the New York Knicks, unfortunately, which puts a little extra sting on it. We talked all about that already. When looking at the Sixers roster now, so Quinton Grimes will be that 14th player here. Do you think they use that 15th roster spot? I'm more of the mindset that they probably don't, but there are two names that I did want to bring up. Shout out to Teacher Got Game in the comments saying, I would love to fill out the last roster spot with Dean Wade or Trey Lyles. And I will say, Trey Lyles is a guy that has a bit of my attention there, but do you think it's more likely that they just carry an empty roster spot, or is Lyles the type of guy that you would make that type of move for?
At first, I was kind of more pro them using the roster spot on Lyles or Chris Boucher, depending if Nick Nurse and him can work together. But the more I thought about it, the more I kind of had faith in Dominic Barlow and / or Jabari Walker.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I think it's probably best to save it to convert one of them to a two-way, assuming at least one of them pans out into at least a rotational four. So I'm definitely with you there.
Yeah, and there were some flashes from each of those guys, well, for Dominic Barlow in particular on Summer League, and I'm pretty high on Jabari Walker, that I would make that bet that guy maybe plays himself above a two-way contract and earns a standard upgrade, but obviously that will play itself out over time here. Ricky Council, a casualty from the Philadelphia 76ers since we last spoke here. Any thoughts on that? I think you and I were both a little cognizant of the writing was on the wall for Ricky, and I did not see it working out in Philadelphia, in particular with all these roster restrictions. So any thoughts on Ricky's tenure not working out with the Sixers?
It sucks. I mean, at the end of the day, it really does. And I think your tweet summed it up perfectly. Ricky Council, with all the chaos, especially in the later half of the season, he had all the pathway to succeed and kind of showcase himself, improve the weaknesses of his game, and he just didn't. And
yeah,
there's really just no excuse for it. Like, first season came in, he had so many great moments. I keep thinking about that skip pass in that Spurs game.
Yep.
You know, his breakout game against the Wizards, 19 points, 10 rebounds. Just this fun athleticism dunker that the Sixers just didn't really have at that point. And he just made no progress in year two. The lack of shooting, shot making, decision making left a lot to be desired, especially off the dribble.
The double step
didn't really
back
cut
threes.
as much as he should. Oh man. But defensively, he was just really no progression. And with how many talented guys the Sixers have, especially with how Justin Edwards ascended, there was just no reason for him to be on the team anymore, especially because he was taking up that $2 million non-guaranteed contract. So
yeah,
this makes sense on so many fronts, unfortunately. But I liked Ricky as a player and what he brought, especially as an energy guy. So wish him the best. Hope he gets picked up by some team in training camp.
Yeah, he was a guy I was rooting for, and it's disappointing that this isn't the end of the road, but I completely get it from the Sixers stance and do feel that this was the right decision. And on the, like, Justin Edwards in contrast here, stood out so much as what you got from Justin Edwards was just exactly what he's supposed to do in a basketball court. He'll make the connective pass when he's supposed to. He'll shoot the catch and shoot open three. He'll get downhill and attack the basket. He'll play good defense. Ricky, it was a roll of the dice on an every night basis for what he's going to do. I still think there's a player in there that it could be cleaned up, that he could help a basketball team, but we did not see that last year. And you mentioned,
where do you think he'd fit?
I
was trying to think about that. I really couldn't think of anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, nothing has jumped to me either. I probably think the best role for him from like a long-term perspective is like a bench spark plug type guy. Like maybe not quite a six man, as I don't think he probably gets to that level here, but you got to let him have his madness. Like that is sort of some of his calling card here, but you got to also clean up from Ricky's perspective some of the other stuff that you can't be taking the double step back threes, which seem to be one of his go-to shots and directly hurt his percentages. I will add, it's like if you're for a guy like Ricky Council, you're unfortunately going to be judged so much on what that 3-point percentage is. And we saw a significant dip below 30% last year. That when you add in all the other factors on the decision making and not him being a stellar defender and all these other factors, that's just kind of not an NBA player. So I don't really have like a team that pops as like a fit. Maybe like a Utah Jazz or something like that is in the early rebuild and can have him play through his mistakes. Shout out to Keep Money in the chat saying I like Ricky at the Chicago Bulls. That's an interesting thought there. I think they have some madness guys already as well.
They got some crazy amount of wings.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Yeah, I don't have a clear name for who is the fit, but certainly we're rooting for him wherever he lands. Also did want to bring
I'd
up
agree.
this comment from Keep Money as well. What do you think about us trading for Jonathan Kuminga? So obviously there is some unhappiness there. I see a pretty clear reaction. Talk me through it, Jacob.
Jonathan Kuminga wants to be the guy, and on a team with so much talent already, I just don't see it at all. Like, yes, he technically fills that power forward need, but considering he wasn't willing to sacrifice and do the little things for a team with a motion heavy system with Steph Curry on the team for years, on a team where he won a championship, I might add, it's just not a good fit, especially because they're trying to build a winning culture. I'm not with it at all.
Yeah,
That's all I gotta say.
I'm not the biggest Kuminga guy either. I will say I have some sympathy for him in regard to like Golden State is one of the more unique systems, probably the most unique in all of the NBA as far as like the things that you're specific. But like for Kuminga, you also just got to be able to buy in and do that, man. Like you have to be able to just be willing to set screens, roll to the basket, allow Steph Curry to be Steph Curry and all those other things. And he did not show progress in that. If anything, there was some regression there, and Steve Kerr made that quite clear in his decision-making process. I do think Kuminga's right in these stance of like his growth has been stunted a bit, but that is his own doing that was the case and why that happened there. So yeah, I don't see it from the Sixers perspective. That is one of the more interesting storylines to note, as I think the clear, I guess, outlook for both sides here is Kuminga doesn't want to be in Golden State. He's a restricted free agent. The Warriors don't really want him back either, but they also can't just let him walk for free, and they're going to want something in return for a guy that they drafted with a pretty high pick there. So how do you see that playing itself out? Do you think ultimately he's just back with the Warriors next year?
I could see a trade to Sacramento just because I don't know what the hell they're doing. I just think they're throwing
Neither do
anything
they.
on the wall to see if it sticks.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, Sacramento is the best destination for him. But I also hate to see it as someone who really likes Keegan Murray's game
Yeah.
because we saw how much Keegan Murray struggled playing next to DeMar and how his percentages dipped and his role decreased. So imagine what that's going to do to him when you add Kuminga to that. And to kind of trace it back to the Sixers, when we've been talking about, I'm just imagining a possession where he has an empty side, right? And Joe, I just can't see him driving to the rim and trying to score in isolation over multiple defenders, playing alongside Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey. Just sounds like such a hectic, bad fit, and I'm just completely out. But I think Kuminga probably, I'd say Sacramento because the Suns, they don't have any assets at this point. They used everything up. So if the Warriors did go that route, I think if they got someone like Devin Carter, I think that'd be a really interesting piece, or even just draft capital because, like you said, they can't lose him for nothing.
Yeah, no, 100% there. And I will say, if Sacramento is ready to trade any young talent, teams should be jumping on that because they have not had the best track record for deciding when to move on from guys and all that. It's kind of a bummer because they were like a young, exciting team, the Beam team, Sacramento, looking like they were finally building some traction, and they're just right back where they left in like the no man's land of the NBA. So I feel bad for Kings fans there. But yeah, maybe Jonathan Kuminga will fire them up a little bit. Now, to close out here, I believe the Sixers are going to be a playoff team next year. For all this disrespect that I did want to bring up, ranked 18th in the standings, Joel Embiid's never going to step back on the floor. When I look at this Eastern Conference, I don't see a way that this Sixers team is not at least like in the 40-ish win range and probably a little above it. And I think that makes them a playoff team in next year's Eastern Conference. Do you think I'm crazy for that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I saw the over under was 43.5, and I thought that was actually perfect
Yeah.
because you have to assume to some degree that Joel Embiid and Paul George are going to miss time. And you look across the Eastern Conference, I think Cleveland and New York are definitely, you could pencil them in to finish higher.
Yeah.
And I'd even go Orlando and Atlanta just because of how the regular season favors deeper and younger teams. And that's just always how it goes. So it's not me saying that they're necessarily better than the Sixers, but as far as seeding goes, I'd probably pencil them in as well. So I think anywhere from like 3 to 6 range, the Sixers will finish. I think my money will be on the fifth seed, though.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. That is more of the outlook that I'm in tune with. Like, for what it's worth, the Detroit Pistons were the 6th seed last year in the East with 44 wins there. I think across the conference, the teams got weaker. That I don't see the Celtics winning 61 games this year. The Cavaliers, we'll see what happens. Not that anyone's going to be overly enthused on how their regular season goes based on the playoff shortcomings that have now popped up in back-to-back seasons. But it does feel to me like there is just this complete tune them out. Nobody cares about the Sixers. There's no expectations. This team is still going to be in the mix in my mind, and I'm going to continue sticking to that take there.
Yeah, I think in a weird way, they're almost kind of like the Clippers. Granted, the Sixers have a much more wide open conference, but just a team is gonna kind of hope things break right and they kind of have like a puncher's chance just to get in there.
Yeah, and for the Clippers specifically, they're very much operating on this 2-year window that they've tied all their contracts, with Ivica Zubac being the only exception here, for contracts set to expire. Now, in theory, there is this very lucrative free agent class that could come into the market. We're talking Nikola Jokic, we're talking Luka Doncic, we're talking Giannis Antetokounmpo in that 2027 offseason there. We will see if those names actually make it to that stage, as there's quite a push for Luka to sign an extension, which I think likely will be done there, and we will see what happens with Giannis and Jokic there. If things do completely fall apart, that will be the season in which the Sixers will be retaining that Clippers draft pick there. If you had to predict right now, what is more likely? That the Clippers retool successfully, find a competent basketball team with a legitimate star there and are right in the mix in the Western Conference, or they completely bottom out and the Sixers are looking at a potential top 10 pick? Which of those do you think is more likely to happen?
I think we're looking at a top 10 pick because I'm kind of reminded of the 2010 offseason where the Clippers struck out on literally everybody.
Yeah.
No Dwayne Wade, no LeBron James, no Chris Bosh, no Carlos Boozer, nothing.
I love Carlos Boozer. But yeah, I do think that is probably the more likely bet, and that is a nice piece to continue holding on to from the Sixers perspective, that as we talk about this young core, that could potentially be a lucrative name being added to that mix here. The last question before we fully wrap up here, appreciate you guys getting involved in the chat, from Keep Money once again. If we're being honest, what are we expecting from Paul George next year? And I do think that is a tough question to answer as well. Not as significant of health concerns as Joel Embiid, although we did get that surprise knee surgery coming out of absolutely nowhere there, which isn't the most encouraging sign. But if you had to predict right now, what does Paul George's role look like next year on this team?
I feel like I'm more optimistic than I should be, to be honest. But that optimism, it's still very real. I think we're looking at like 18, 19 points per game on like above average efficiency. I think that's a reasonable expectation. Maybe a little bit too optimistic at this point, but that's kind of what I'm rolling with.
Yeah, he shot in the 20% on open threes last year, which just...
That's not going to happen again.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. That's just not Paul George. That hasn't been Paul George for the past decade, 15 years of basketball, and I do think that we'll see some positive regression in that. I think everything that could go wrong did go wrong last year, and he was more of an effect of that than a cause than anything. But we will see. Obviously hoping for a bounce-back season there. I hope each of these guys are feeling the disrespect a little bit, that there is a little bit of a chip in the shoulder mentality that is coming from the Sixers team. We will see if that's how it plays itself out on the floor. But Jacob, I appreciate you popping on and chopping it up with me. What else you got going on with Sixers Country, your written content? What else are you working on lately?
Oh, I started a TikTok. Yeah.
Oh,
Jay
yeah.
Moreno, 76ers. Daily Sixers talk. Just tune in. Keep pumping out articles for FanSided. Posting content, Instagram, Twitter. You know where I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Crushing it. The #1 Sixers follow that you need to have across all platforms there, and the TikTok
Appreciate
definitely
that.
worth checking out. So make sure you guys are tapping into all Jacob stuff. Appreciate each and one of you guys for hanging with us over on Sixers Digest today. If you did not already, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button. Drop a like on this video. Drop your thoughts below, any other comments you have. We'll have more videos ripping out for the rest of the weekend and just about every day, as much as we can come up with some off-season content here. So appreciate each and one of you guys once again.